Hi, I'm Janice Kephart and welcome to Border Basics. Since the late 1990s, I've studied closely how terrorists abuse our borders with special emphasis on the 9/11 terrorists. What I learned is that fraud is the backbone of illegal travel across borders, whether you are a terrorist or anyone else. Take the recent case of Manoj Kargudri and his 3 years of fraud to get in and stay in the United States. Manoj Kargudri is a 36-year-old Indian national who shut down San Antonio Airport on August 26, 2008, when Transportation Security Administration personnel found box cutters and a homemade battery strapped to an MP3 player in his carry-on luggage. He had a one-way ticket to Washington, D.C. TSA called in San Antonio police, who in turn requested support from the FBI and immigration enforcement personnel. Kargudri was later cleared of any potential terrorism charges, but the immigration charges stuck. On September 11, 2008, Kargudri was indicted in San Antonio federal court on charges of immigration fraud. Considered a flight risk, he was held pending a December 2008 trial. Investigators learned that despite 5 contacts with immigration authorities in 3 years, he was never caught. So here's the basic issue. Does missing fraud 5 times over the course of 3 years indicate that there are still serious problems with making sure our borders are secure? Or are we satisfied with leaving our border security to TSA, whose job description doesn't include borders? Let's take a look at the facts in the Kargudri case and see if we can get some answers. Kargudri's story starts in 2003, when a blanket employer petition was filed with the government for Honeywell International employees. Honeywell International is a high-tech, $38 billion a year company servicing about 100 countries with about half of its 120,000 employees in the United States. Many of Honeywell products provide essential protection for commercial and defense aircraft. Honeywell is also very active in the cybersecurity realm. With many locations in the United States, someone obtained a Honeywell Employer Petition document and submitted it to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service at the Department of Homeland Security, otherwise known as USCIS. The petition was fraudulent, requesting that USCIS authorize approvals of employment-based visas that sought to bring overseas Honeywell employees into the U.S. to work at U.S. Honeywell locations. However, as Honeywell was never asked to verify that they had submitted the petition, nor verify its contents, the petition was approved on October 15, 2003. For 2.5 years, that Honeywell petition stood in the system as valid and approved. It would take 11 Indian nationals using that petition to acquire Honeywell employment-based visas over the next 2.5 years for the State Department to figure out that its sister agency should never have approved the petition in the first place. Kargudri was one of the 11 Indian nationals that used the fake Honeywell petition to apply for a visa at the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi. None of the information he provided was ever questioned, and he was granted a 3-year visa on June 2, 2005. A couple weeks later, on June 12, 2005, Kargudri flew into New York City and presented himself for immigration admission. Presenting a valid employee-based visa and passport with no prior U.S. record, Kargudri was permitted to enter for 3 years. If he had been a tourist, he likely would have received valid entry for 6 months. On October 4, 2005, a few months later, the New Delhi U.S. Consulate discovered that the Honeywell petition was selling for $3,000 on the streets of New Delhi. They determined Kargudri and one other person, whose identity hasn't been made public, had already entered the U.S. Kargudri's visa was revoked. A lookout was sent to border authorities, but it was too late. He had already been in the U.S. for 4 months and impossible to find, really. For the next 3 years, he legally slipped between jobs working for donut companies and software firms. In January 2008, 3 years later, Kargudri was bold enough to seek change in his status from employee to student in order to attend Grayson College in Denison, Texas. His application was reviewed by USCIS, the same agency that approved the Honeywell petition, and approved on August 1, 2008. Just like the initial adjudicator of the Honeywell petition and the consular officer in New Delhi, the latest immigration adjudicator also did not check any background information to verify it, nor did the outstanding lookout make its way into the adjudication process to raise more questions. Either way, Kargudri did not matriculate, and the college canceled his student status as required by law. Within a month, he was at San Antonio Airport trying to board a plane with a one-way ticket to Washington, D.C. While it's encouraging that TSA did its job, the immigration system failed 5 times to catch Kargudri. This seems awfully reminiscent of the 9/11 hijackers, whose visas were approved 22 of 23 times, entered the U.S. over 21 months a total of 34 times, and only once were turned away. In this case, most helpful would have been if the Honeywell petition was electronic and upon filing, an e-receipt had been generated to Honeywell asking them to certify that they had submitted the application and that its contents were true and accurate. If Honeywell had said yes, processing would continue. If Honeywell had said no or didn't answer, processing would stop and there would be a basis for investigation to determine if records were inaccurate or if there was any fraud involved. It would save a waste of resources that hit the immigration system 5 times over and now the court system in Texas. In fact, e-filing and e-processing for immigration applications has been promised for years, but it's still not delivered to this day, despite recent promises by USCIS to make it so. Paper filing without identity verification encourages fraud, which is known to be about 20% just in the employment-based applications alone. And remember, that statistic doesn't even include unknown fraud like the Honeywell and Kargudri applications that slipped through. Adding efficiency and lowering costs over the long term, electronic filing and certification of employment-based petitions can reduce fraud the same way credit card companies have reduced fraud by asking consumers to certify certain transactions. If such a certification mechanism had been in place, Honeywell could have said no from the get-go. And Mr. Kargudri might still be in New Delhi trying to figure out how to fake his way into the United States. Bringing you Border Basics, this is Janice Kephart.